One.
This show is called Wake Up and Lead, as you all know. I've never really said this, but I'd say it's for two reasons. 90% of the reason it's called that is because I think a lot of people drift through life. They coast through life and they're asleep, especially in their 20s. And I want you to wake up and start taking ownership of your life. The other 10% is we can take the morning approach and you wake up and just get after the day. Well, my guest today, this guy is a leader. He's on fire, but sometimes he wakes up at like 11 p.m., which is why he's drinking. Which is why he's drinking a Celsius right now because it's noon, but it's a Saturday, so he should be asleep right now. But anyways, he wakes up and leads all the time. Trent Taylor, welcome to the show.
Hampton, thanks so much for that great introduction, brother.
I'm excited to have you here. Trent and I go way back. I say that as if we're super old, but to Samford University. Trent has had a wonderful impact on my life. He was a grade older than me in my fraternity, introduced me to campus outreach, the ministry that we were both a part of, and he works for now. So this is me publicly thanking you for the impact that you had on my life. I'm just super excited to have you here, man.
Man, I really appreciate it, dude. I'm excited to chop it up. So thanks for having me.
Okay, sweet. Well, I want to hear some of your story. I know you've told a lot of people this, but I think just for people to understand where you're coming from and why you do what you do now, I think it'll be super helpful to hear.
Yeah. So, man, born and raised in Carrollton, Georgia, ended up finding Samford probably, man, my senior year of high school, and ended up coming into Samford. I feel like everyone, you want to be well known, you want to have a lot of leadership positions. And so for me, man, I came in and I got after it. So I was freshman class president. I was in a lot of SGA leadership positions. I was an orientation leader as a freshman to kind of help welcome in the new class. I was going to be coming in the following year. And so, man, my resume, it was building up. I remember bragging to my parents. I was like, man, I feel like I've got a better resume than some of the seniors, already in even at Samford. Very prideful. But man, I think just finding a lot of security and identity in a lot of these leadership positions that I had. And man, not really realizing just how quickly and everything can just kind of disappear almost overnight. And so Halloween night, my freshman year at Samford, was with a lot of fraternity brothers in our freshman dorm room. We had a party, really big party. Long story short, it got busted. And so kind of like as a punishment, as the consequence for getting caught with alcohol at a private Christian university, man, I lost every single one of my leadership positions. So I was removed from class president. I was fired from my summer job. And man, it was really just kind of left wondering because I'd put so much stock in my leadership positions that once they were gone, really began to question, who am I? And so kind of in the following months, man, I really got involved with this ministry called Campus Outreach. And because my summer plans had been graciously / forcibly removed as a result of my getting caught Halloween night, I ended up going down to this 8-week discipleship program and kind of Christian leadership program called Beach Project. And so, man, I'm down there, was making, decent bit of money, but man, really growing. And what does it look like to be a leader, but not only a leader, but a Christian leader and a godly leader as well. And I think for me, a lot of my life was a lot of my worth and my value kind of came in, man, what I did. I was a captain on the soccer team of high school. I was on the debate team, and I was a captain of the debate team in high school. And so, man, a lot of my worth, a lot of my value that I placed came through my positions that I had. And man, I think that kind of really transferred over and translated to my relationship with God as well. It's like, man, I've got to do all these really good things in order to earn God's approval. And man, going on a Beach Project, really hearing for the first time, it's like, man, Trent, the good news of Jesus, it's not that you have to clean your life up, that you've got to have all your stuff together, or that you have to really start pursuing God. It's like, man, I can't do anything. It's like, man, I'm spiritually dead. I'm not just spiritually injured. I'm spiritually dead. But man, by God's grace, man, through the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, man, he offers eternal life, not as like a transaction, like, hey, if you do this, Trent, then I'll do this. But it's kind of a free gift. And man, that really just radically changed my world. I came to Christ after my freshman year at college. And man, the past, I guess, 7 years now, both as a student and full-time staff, man, just been working with the college ministry campus outreach. So
amazing story. And I've heard that many times. And guys, Trent said that in about 4 minutes. There's a lot more that goes into it, but he's also gotten really good at articulating his story and his testimony. And ultimately the climax of that being, we are dead in our sins. And ultimately, like, we can find hope through Christ and we don't have to clean ourselves up, which I think is a lie that a lot of us believe. What's very interesting is this podcast is called Wake Up and Lead. As I talked about earlier, a lot of us in our 20s, I think that we are coasting through life. We're drifting through life and we're asleep. And, and if we're speaking in Bible terms, we're spiritually dead, which is actually a term that I learned from Trent that I want to go to in a second. But just as a reminder, if you're in your 20s, like, what happened to Trent, and I believe this was the grace of God, at 18 years old happens to a lot of people at 50. You live this life, you make all the money, you get all the titles, but then you have a poor relationship with your children. Maybe you get divorced, maybe you lose your job, or you enter into some sort of midlife crisis to try to find hope and meaning again because you've made all the money and done all the things. And so praise God for showing you some of these things early on. And I have my own story of that. And Trent was a huge part of it. Like when I realized that I was broken and this world had nothing to offer me, Trent was one of the first guys that stepped in and said, "Hey, I'm here for you, brother. Let's talk through this. Let's look at what it really means to follow God." And one of the ways we did that was Ephesians 2:1-10. I might put Trent on the spot right here because we memorized this together. I wonder if you still got it in you, man.
I mean, do you want me to recite it fully on this podcast right now, or?
I mean, I don't know if you can rip it if you've got it in you.
I kind of want to see if you still got it in you, though. Honestly, man, just kind of put it back on you. I tried to train you and multiply that into you. If we want to take the wild spark. He's like, I mean, if we want to take the next 45 seconds to kind of recite Ephesians 2:1-10. Well, here, before I do that, why don't you explain, like, man, why did I have you memorize your junior year of college, Ephesians 2, chapter 2, verses 1-10?
I love it.
We'll turn this into like a question for you.
I put Trent on the spot and he panicked. No, I'm kidding. No, I think in the passage, it talks about how we were dead in our trespasses and sins in which we once walked, following the course of this world, following the enemy, and believing the lies essentially that this world has to offer us. And so we were spiritually dead. And I had not really thought about that concept before. But then the best and biggest but in the Bible, it ends up saying, like, but God, being rich in mercy because of the great love with which he loves us, made us alive together with Christ. By grace you have been saved through faith. And this is not your own doing. And I'm forgetting like every single words here, but that was the first time like I could articulate. I think I could say, what does the gospel mean? But that's when I realized that I actually was spiritually dead. I had no meaning or purpose. And growing up in what we like to call the Bible Belt, Alabama, I'm wearing a hat that says Alabama on it. You kind of go to church, you may go to a Christian school, and that's a wonderful blessing. But I do think that can be dangerous for those of us because we can grow numb to the truths that we've heard so often and that we don't actually believe it. What other context would you add to that passage?
Dude, honestly, man, I think you summed it up really well. And man, it's a gift, right? And it's not something that we can earn. 'Cause if it was, then it was something that we could just earn and kind of put God in our debt. Man, Jesus kind of came and died for no purpose. But logically, the only reason, rationally speaking, that it would make sense that Jesus had to come and die was if we were unable to do it, man, ourselves. And so, I think you summarized it really well. You kind of went from the bad news to the good news. And so, man, I'm proud of you. Glad that's kind of stuck around the past maybe 4 or 5 years, man. So really, really proud of you, my dude.
Come on, man. So Trent and I worked out before this, and the place we work out, there's a hot tub. So we had a nice deep conversation in the hot tub after this. One of the things we were talking about is oftentimes as Christians, we glorify the
Hmm.
moment that I got saved, the song that was playing. I walked down the aisle, I prayed this prayer. And I do believe that many of us, like, that was a moment that we actually got saved. But Trent, can you finish some of this conversation for me? Just as somebody that is meeting with a lot of students that share about that moment and just some of the thoughts you have around it.
Yeah, man, I think a lot of times there might have been like a camp or a prayer, kind of a really big emotional experience that a lot of students that I meet with, a lot of college students at Stanford, will point back to and say, man, this is how I know that I'm a Christian. Because, man, I had this really big emotional experience at a church camp. I walked the aisle, prayed the prayer, did something. But man, a lot of times, if you're pointing back to something, I think that's where we can kind of get into a little bit of the issue, and that's where man, I really kind of come alongside of them and say, it's like, man, we know that we're not Christians because we can point back and say, hey, I know I'm a Christian because I prayed a prayer, or I did XYZ, or I really started living a more moral lifestyle. It's like, man, we know, and we say this graciously, man, we say this humbly, that I'm a Christian, that we are Christians, because, man, there's a present trust in the finished work of Christ. And there's this present trust of I'm not trusting in my own efforts in order to kind of get back into God's good graces. I think every other religion, if you kind of place God at the top of a mountain, kind of every other religion, people might say it might be a different avenue, different pathway up to God, but they're ultimately going to get at the same destination. And man, what I think is a beautiful thing about Christianity um, is that, man, it's the sole religion, the exclusive religion, if you want to even call it that, where, man, God comes off the mountain because he acknowledges that, man, we can't even start that trek up the mountain on our own, takes us up and then and brings us back up to the top of the mountain. So what I would say with that is, like, man, a lot of times we can point to a decision in the past, but it's like, a decision isn't what saves you. A prayer isn't what saves you. Man, it's the person of Jesus that's ultimately going to save you. And so that really is like, man, am I currently trusting in the finished work of Christ? And by God's grace, am I really trying to now offer my life as a living sacrifice and to really put to death the old self um, and put on the new self? So,
Amen. That's really good. And I think another danger that I've even fell into is you get saved, you're on fire, and then maybe a year passes or 2 years pass, and we're promised suffering in this life, but it doesn't mean that immediately everything is better. You have no problems, hard things don't happen, you don't have doubts, you don't have questions. And so maybe a lot of us are listening to this and they're like, Trent Hampton, like, I get it, I'm saved, but I'm confused about this, or I'm frustrated with God, or this hard thing is going on in my life. Why is this happening? I mean, maybe even some of your personal story, if you have anything that comes to mind, or just advice to someone that they really are trusting in God, yet hard things are still happening. I mean, what does that look like in the Christian life?
yeah, man, and I think the problem of evil is, and just like suffering. I mean, it's something that every single worldview, man, has to answer. Um, the if you're not religious and you're listening to this podcast, man, you still, your worldview. If you're agnostic or atheist or just kind of, I don't really know what. It's like, man, the problem of evil and suffering is something that every single worldview has to answer. Especially if you're listening to this podcast right now and you're suffering. I think, man, just the first thing that I'd say as a Christian is, man, I'm sorry. Man, that's not how the Lord originally created this world to be. That, man, a lot of times suffering just comes into our lives, and it's like, man, I wish I could give you a specific answer, and man, I don't really know. Hampton, it's interesting that you kind of brought up personal story. I think I was I'd probably been walking with the Lord now for about 3 years, and kind of the summer going into my senior year, then all my senior year, really started experiencing just a lot of anxiety and depression for the first time. And I think that a lot of people can think, you're a Christian, you're supposed to be joyful and happy all the time and never sad. And I think, man, I kind of started to believe that lie. I was like, man, something's got to be wrong with me. The Lord's got to be disappointed in me. But I love the Bible because every season that we will experience as humans under the sun, and it's in there. And so really beginning to see some of like the Psalms of lament, that man, I'm able to be honest kind of with God. But man, it was I think my senior year was probably, and the year kind of after college was probably one of the most probably the darkest seasons that I've been in. Just man, spiritually, mentally, and I think kind of coming to figure out that it was really just kind of some obsessive compulsive anxiety disorder, man, and really struggling with intrusive thoughts. And man, it wasn't until I kind of humbled myself and began asking for professional help, um, and seeing that man, Christians can ask for help. Like man, yes, like God has also equipped man, godly men and godly women to be able to counsel us through just the brokenness, man, that we experience kind of here and now. But kind of going back to what I said initially, it's like man, every worldview has to answer the problem of evil and suffering. But man, the only worldview that really kind of makes sense of it, man, the more that I've researched is man is Christianity, because I think a lot of times we can say, man, God is off the hook, God is distant, God is aloof in suffering. Man, what we see in the person of Christ is that man, God is on the hook for suffering. That He enters into the evil and the suffering of this world. The only truly innocent person who's ever walked the face of this earth, man, the Lord Jesus Christ, He endured mocking, shame. He was beaten, He was spat upon, and He was crucified on a cross. And man, that's not God kind of being distant in heaven. Man, that's God saying, I love my creation so much that they can't bring themselves back into a right relationship with me. So I'm having to send my only son to be that perfect substitute on their behalf. Um, and so, man, suffering is just, it's a heavy thing. Um, but man, as I've just been praying through just the past few years and really experiencing it, it really has just expanded my field to be able to relate, man, whether you're a Christian or whether you're not, going through hard times. I'm much more able, as I'm sitting across from a college student or a colleague, or man, maybe just somebody random that I met at a coffee shop, really be able to enter into man, just some of that suffering and say, man, I'm really sorry that you've experienced that. I get it, because man, I'm right there with you that I've experienced that. But here's the hope that I've also found as a result of man being a Christian and walking through those seasons.
Mm, good stuff, man. I love how you talked about humbling yourself and meeting with other godly people to give you advice, seeking professional help. Those are all great things. I also find that a lot of people that suffer and they continue to suffer seem to be in isolation, not in every situation, but we know the power that community can bring. What has that looked like for you? I mean, has that been an encouragement for you as you've gone through hardships?
Man, 100%. My boss now, probably one of my best friends, Micah. He's our current campus director. And I think I would encourage everyone, man, have at least one or two people that man know you inside and out, kind of warts and all. I think a lot of times we kind of guilt, shame from our suffering, or maybe just some of the mistakes that we made. We want to run, we want to hide, but man, there is just so much freedom that comes whenever you bring things kind of out of the darkness and into the light. And so, for me, just community, being able to confess sin, but also, man, even in times of suffering. Not saying that my time of suffering was a result of sin, but having friends, family, really being able to bear those burdens with me, man, that's kind of being able to take some of the weight off my shoulders. It is just it's a tough thing. It's a humbling thing to be able to ask for help and invite people in, but I think a lot of times we don't want to be a quote unquote burden to others. And man, I just think that's a lie. We really need to invite other people, not everybody, we don't need to go to Target and just kind of begin pouring our hearts out to somebody, but having those few close people, I mean, you're really inviting in saying, this is who I am. This is what I'm struggling with. I need some help. Man, there's just a lot of beautiful stuff that really just comes about from having just a good, solid community, whether you're a Christian or whether you're not a Christian.
Mm. I think a lot of us find ourselves in isolation. I don't want to single anyone out, but I think men specifically also struggle with really being vulnerable because society tells us that, we have to be, strong and not have anything hard. But when I think about some of the men that I look up to the most, they're very open and vulnerable about what they're struggling with. This podcast is called Wake Up and Lead. Like I want you, this is about leadership. So whether you're leading yourself or other people, really opening up and being vulnerable about what's on your heart, I think is going to connect you with other people. Like people connect most over brokenness. They connect most through vulnerability. So another thing that I wanted to talk about is something that I've seen is people confusing judgment with conviction. So I'll say that again. People often confuse judgment with conviction. I've done this before. Example, I have a friend that really started pursuing a relationship with God our freshman year of college. And even though I knew all the right answers and everything, I was not really doing that at the time. And maybe there was some judgment in his heart towards me, which is not right. As Christians, we are not supposed to do that. But I told myself the story that they were judging me so that I could justify the way that I was living my life, when actually deep down, I was convicted for the way I was living, but I used the quote judgment as a cop-out to continue living the life that I currently live. So maybe that's you, and I want to gently share that is part of my story. However, I do also want to go to the judgment side of things, because as Christians, sometimes we can be, if you look at the story of the prodigal son, the older brother, the self-righteous ones.
Right.
I've struggled with that. Trent has too. What does that look like in your life? Has that been a struggle at times?
Yeah, man, I wish I could say that I've never struggled with it. Man, I'd be lying to you and all the millions of listeners on this Wake Up and Lead podcast. But dude, yeah, man, I think especially just being in college, in a fraternity, in that culture, where just seeing just a lot of, just what you would expect to find, stereotypical fraternity, party, girls, wallet, in regards to, the money and the resume that you're trying to build and make. Just seeing a lot of brokenness and still, man, really trying to figure out how do I process this. And so rather than, Jesus was probably the perfect person, and he was a perfect person in this, because man, when he looked upon the crowds that were without hope, that were kind of harassed and helpless by the things of this world, man, he had great compassion. Man, he was literally stirred up from the inside. And man, I would be lying if I said, especially during that time, and even now, that I can be susceptible to be like, man, they're living for the world, and kind of elevating myself in a way, in a very prideful way, above these men, these women. So kind of throughout college, especially guys in my fraternity, really just looking at that, it was really easy to kind of have this superiority complex. But man, as a Christian, really seeing that, man, honestly, the conclusions that I've come to by God's grace isn't just something that I kind of finally started, believing on my own. It really was, hey, I'm no better than these guys, right? Romans chapter 3, verse 23 says, every single person that's ever walked this earth falls short, has sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And so, man, even beginning to see a little bit more of man, before I'm looking outward and judging, it's kind of like, man, I, apart from Christ, would be finding life in these exact same things. And so I think it really is judgment. When people think they're being judged, I can they might be being judged. it could also be a defense mechanism, kind of as you were saying. It's like, man, I want to keep justifying the lifestyle that I'm living, rather than what I'm trying to learn and grow in and develop now is, man, kind of a combination of grace and truth. It's like, man, I want to come alongside you. I want to love you, man. I want to care for you and show you and build that relational capital, so you're not just a project, or feel like a project. Man, I also want to really come alongside you and say, man, this is not where life is found. I've tasted, I've seen what the world has to offer. And man, it's not found in any of these things that you're trying to find it in. And being able to point to the one thing or the one person where, man, it's going to be fullness of life is found. So,
Yeah, grace and truth. I love that. And I want to hear about what that looks like in your life now, because campus outreach was a huge part of my life. It was a huge part of Trent's, but you're going on what, year 4 of working there? What is campus outreach, and what do
yeah.
you do?
So yeah, man, that's a great question. So Campus Outreach, it's an interdenominational ministry. So it was formed back in 1978. Man, we're basically on the college campus, both, man, Christian colleges and secular colleges. And man, our heartbeat really is, we want to raise up laborers on the college campus for the lost world, and we want to glorify God by doing those very things. So I think a lot of the same values of multiplication that, man, you have at your job through WildSpark, and kind of like the professional world, man, that is kind of our heartbeat with Campus Outreach as well. It's like, man, we want to raise up men and women who know not only what it's going to look like to spiritually lead themselves in college, but man, also lead themselves in the professional marketplace, lead their families, lead their children as well. And so, man, it really is, man, I'm kind of coming alongside guys, and wherever they're at in their spiritual journey, my desire is to help them take that next step. And man, it is just wild how many different kind of like journeys that people are on, how they got to Samford. But man, it is a privilege to be able just to come alongside of guys that are really beginning to ask questions for the first time in college. Like, man, who am I? What is my life going to be about? How do I make it count? And where is satisfaction ultimately going to be found? I think a lot of times people coming into college are going to try and find it in, sex, alcohol, resume, the internship, the popularity, the leadership position. And man, those things, kind of like a part of my story, and I had a lot of that stuff, and it vanished almost overnight. And so, man, we really think we're all searching for something that's stable, something that's secure. And man, there's really only one thing or one person, man, that, as Hebrews 13 verse 8 says, is the same yesterday, today, and forever. I mean, that's Jesus. I mean, I want to point people to Christ, because man, that is where life and freedom is going to be found. And that's, Jesus is the perfect balance of both grace and truth as well.
Golly, and I'm just so thankful for the work that you're doing and your obedience, because guys, he's an impressive dude. I mean, you were really smart in school, and you kind of did all the things, and I know that you lost some of that, but I mean, there was a ton of other things that you ended up doing in college, and there was a lot of redemption there. As Trent could be doing anything else and making a lot of money, but he is laboring on the college campus and building leaders. And I mean, I'm one of those. So, I mean, I was in a Bible study with Trent and just learned a ton from him. And now, like, without that, I don't know what my life looks like right now. I don't know if I'm following the Lord. I don't know if I'm talking about this leadership stuff and even have this podcast. And so I'm just super grateful for you, man. And just love everything that you're doing. As we're wrapping up here, I don't know if you have anything else you wanted to share, or a charge to somebody that's asking those questions right now. But just kind of wanted to give you the floor before we finished up here.
Yeah, man. I think just the last thing that I would say is, man, Jesus is probably, as C.S. Lewis said, man, he's one of three things. And he's either a liar, man, he's a lunatic, man, or he's the Lord of the universe. And so, man, is he a liar? It's like, I think is where going back and where we're really trying to study the Bible. It's like, man, if you haven't studied the Bible, man, open up, start in the Gospel of John, just kind of read through it. I think that would be my biggest encouragement. And it's like, man, you'll see that Jesus never really lied. And in regards to the lunatic aspect, doesn't really come across as a crazy person. And yes, he's pretty exclusive in saying, man, I am the way, I am the truth, and I'm the life. But man, what we're seeing, that kind of plays into the fact that, man, if Jesus is making that claim that he's Lord, it means that we can't get to God any other way than through Jesus. Because, man, Hampton, I think as you've really hammered home in this podcast, spiritually dead people, if there's a body floating in the ocean that's dead, kind of morbid, and you throw a life preserver at it, that dead body's going to do absolutely nothing to save itself. And in the same way, spiritually, man, we can't do anything to save ourselves. Man, we're sinful, we're broken. God is holy. He is so different than us. And man, the only way that justice can be satisfied, that a sinful and broken person can get back into right relationship with a holy and righteous God, is if, man, we get a record, that we are clothed and credited a record that does not belong to us. And so, man, what it means to be a Christian, ultimately, man, we're looking away from our works. We're looking outside of ourselves to the finished work of Christ on the cross. And if we're standing before the Lord and he were to ask us, man, why should I let you into heaven? We're saying, God, honestly, on my own, I don't deserve it. But Lord, don't look to what I've done for you. Look to what Christ has done for me.
Amen, dude. Thank you so much for joining me. And pardon that voice crack, everyone. I'm still becoming a man. But Trent, I got to end this way. I want you to tell everybody to wake up and lead. I know you might think it's cheesy, but I'm going to say it's time for you and me, and then you say to wake up and lead. So, all right. It's time for you and me.
Wake up and lead, baby. Let's go.